For more than 100 years, a single idea has followed millions of children like a shadow they never asked for. A diagnosis that was never real, but felt real. A label that shaped how teachers judged them, how parents spoke about them, and how society quietly feared them. Its name was Only Child Syndrome. To understand how deeply this myth cut, you have to go back, far back into a world terrified of change. America, 1896. Factories rising, cities swelling, immigration booming. People feared the country was losing its moral center. And in the middle of that anxiety stood Granville Stanley Hall, a towering figure in early psychology, and a man searching for simple explanations in a complicated world. Hall looked at children without siblings and saw not individuals, but defects. He wrote that being an only child was a disease in itself, a statement that burned itself into the public imagination. No data, no large studies, only prejudice wrapped in scientific language. And yet, society believed him, because myths that simplify people are easy to hold on to. Because when the world feels unstable, humans reach for quick labels, someone to blame, someone to fix, someone to define. For the next century, this invented syndrome became a cultural reflex, a shortcut. A stereotype served to parents, teachers, and anyone who needed an easy explanation for a child who was shy, intense, imaginative, or simply different. But myths don't just mislabel people. They wound them. They shape how a child sees themselves, long before they ever understand who they really are. This is how a non-existent disorder became one of the most damaging stories America ever told its only children. For decades, the myth marched on untouched. Schools repeated it. Parents warned about it. Society absorbed it as truth. But eventually, science decided to ask a simple question. What if this syndrome didn't exist at all? In the 1970 seconds, social psychologist Tony Falbo began piecing together something no one else had bothered to look at: actual data. Along with her colleague Denise Pollitt, she reviewed over 115 independent studies on only children, an enormous body of research stretching across decades, cultures, and methodologies. And the result was almost anticlimactic in its clarity. There was nothing there. No spike in selfishness. No surge in narcissism. No pattern of poor social skills, emotional immaturity, or maladjustment. Instead, something unexpected emerged. Only children tended to score slightly higher on intelligence tests, and many showed stronger academic motivation. Researchers believed this came from spending more one-on-one time with adults, absorbing vocabulary, reasoning, and expectations directly without dilution. Falbo didn't just debunk a stereotype. She exposed how powerful and lazy labels can be. She showed that the story society believed for 70 years had never passed even the most basic scientific test. Because the truth is simple. The only child syndrome was never a psychological condition. It was a cultural narrative repeated often enough that people forgot to question it. Science didn't just correct the myth. It revealed something even more important. Only children were never the problem. The stereotype was. Loneliness is a strange thing. People think it looks obvious: an empty room, a quiet house, a child playing alone on the carpet. But the loneliness of an only child isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It isn't even visible. It's ambient, a quiet hum beneath everything. Most only children are perfectly comfortable being alone. They're artists of solitude, architects of inner worlds. Give them a book, a toy, a blank piece of paper, and they can disappear for hours into imagination. Aloneness they master early. But loneliness, that's different. Loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of someone who shares your reality. Growing up without siblings means growing up without a witness. No one to sit beside you during a family argument and whisper, "Did you see that too?" No one to validate your confusion when the house feels tense for reasons adults won't explain. No one to share the micro moments, the raised eyebrow, the inside joke, the collective sigh when a parent slams a door. So the only child becomes the lone archivist of their entire childhood. Every emotion, every shift in atmosphere, every unspoken rule they process alone. And when you carry all of that by yourself, something subtle begins to form. A soft, lingering sense that you are on your own in ways other children are not. This invisible loneliness shapes how only children move through the world. It's why so many of them scan rooms before entering, why they read emotional cues with uncanny precision, why they can sense tension before anyone speaks a word. They grew up without a sibling buffer, so their nervous system became its own radar. But it also explains the paradox in adulthood. Only children crave connection and fear it. They long for that missing other, yet they hesitate, unsure how much of their inner world is safe to share. They've carried everything alone for so long that letting someone in feels both deeply comforting and dangerously vulnerable. This is the invisible wound. Not the solitude itself, but the silent longing for someone who understands it from the inside. There's a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes painfully clear, when an only child stops being just a kid and quietly steps into a role no one assigned but everyone relied on. It happens because their world is dominated by adults. Their conversations, their humour, their conflicts, their expectations, everything around them is shaped by grown-up energy. And without siblings to balance the scale, the child adapts upward. They start speaking like adults, thinking like adults, listening to problems meant for adults. Psychologists call this adult-dominated socialization, but in real life, it looks like something simpler. A child who becomes the emotional sponge of the household. They learn to read their parents' moods before breakfast. They sense when a joke lands wrong, when a voice tightens, when a conversation is about to go dark. Not because they're gifted, but because they have no one else to share the emotional workload with. And slowly, without meaning to, they take on roles that do not belong to them. The mediator during arguments, sir. The peacekeeper when tensions rise. The confidant when a parent feels lonely. The therapist when a parent overshares. It's a strange duality being praised for maturity while silently paying the cost of it. Then, outside the home, everything flips. On the playground, other kids feel chaotic, unpredictable, too loud. Their jokes seem childish. Their conflicts seem pointless. The only child feels older, not superior, just out of sync. Caught between two worlds, too grown for children their age, too young for the adults they understand so well. This is the little adult blueprint. A childhood fast-forwarded, a maturity unchosen, and a quiet longing to simply be a kid that never fully goes away. When you grow up without siblings, your first real social arena isn't the living room, it's the playground. And that difference matters more than most people realise. Children with siblings get a built-in training ground. They learn negotiation because someone else wants the same toy. They learn conflict resolution because someone is always annoyed. They learn emotional repair because they fight. And then 5 minutes later, they're friends again. Only children don't get those reps. So their first lessons in social dynamics happen in public, not in private, in front of other kids, teachers, and invisible social scoreboards. It's socialization on hard mode, which is why many only children swing toward one of two extremes. 1. The people pleaser. They become overly accommodating, overly generous, overly careful. Not because they're weak, but because friendship feels precious in a way other kids take for granted. Losing a friend feels like losing the only peer connection they have. 2. The hyper-independent lone wolf. They're used to their own company. They trust self-reliance. They're comfortable being the observer rather than the participant. And they protect that comfort fiercely because relying on others feels foreign. Underneath both patterns is the same emotional truth. Social interaction requires more energy when you've had less practice at home. This challenge often follows them into adulthood. At work, only children may struggle with delegation because they learned early that tasks get done faster and cleaner when you do them yourself. In friendships, they may overthink small conflicts because they never learned the fight and repair cycle siblings practice daily. But the reality is not that only children are socially deficient. It's that they were thrown into the deep end without a flotation device and still managed to swim. There's a moment in almost every only child's life when they realize something quietly terrifying. There is no backup, no sibling to absorb pressure, no one to share the spotlight, no one to dilute the hopes whispered into their future. Every dream a parent ever had, every expectation, spoken or unspoken, lands on one pair of shoulders, and the child knows it. Sometimes it's explicit. Make us proud. Don't waste the opportunity we never had. You're all we've got. Other times, it's unspoken but unmistakable. In the way a parent watches their report card, in the way they introduce them to relatives, in the way every achievement is celebrated, with a shine that feels a little too bright. This is the burden of expectation, and it shapes an entire identity. Only children grow up believing mistakes cost more. That failure isn't just a learning experience. It's letting down the entire family legacy. It's disappointing the two people who invested everything in them. It's breaking something that can't be rebuilt by anyone else. So they adapt. They become diligent, disciplined, hyper-responsible. Children who double-check their homework, rehearse their apologies, and anticipate consequences before adults even notice the problem. But beneath the competence lies a constant tension, the fear of not being enough, fear of failing academically, fear of making the wrong career choice, fear of choosing a partner their parents won't approve of, fear of living a life that doesn't justify the sacrifices made for them. This pressure doesn't fade with age. It matures. It becomes perfectionism. It becomes self-criticism. It becomes the silent rule they live by. If I fall, there is no one else to catch the weight. When a child grows up carrying responsibility meant for 2 or 3, something subtle begins to form beneath the surface. Not flaws, not weaknesses, but shadow traits, habits of survival that feel natural in childhood, yet turn heavy in adulthood. It starts with overthinking. Only children spend years relying on themselves to interpret moods, decode tension, and predict emotional storms. That vigilance becomes a reflex. As adults, they replay conversations, analyze tone shifts, and interpret silence like data points because their nervous system was trained to stay alert. Then comes self-blame. In a home where they're the only variable, it's easy to assume they caused the problem. If a parent is upset, the child wonders, was it me? That question follows them for years. turning into a quiet, persistent guilt whenever someone is disappointed, even when it has nothing to do with them. There's also the burden of competency. When you're praised your whole life for being so mature, you learn to hide your confusion, your fears, your messy emotions. You become the helper, the fixer, the reliable one. But inside, you may feel exhausted, unseen, or secretly longing for someone strong enough to take the weight off your shoulders just once. And then there's the need for control. Not because only children are controlling, but because unpredictability once felt dangerous. They grew up without a teammate, so order became their safety. All these shadow traits, overthinking, over-responsibility, self-sufficiency that borders on isolation, are not signs of brokenness. They're signs of a child who adapted too soon, too deeply, and too alone. They're the echoes of a childhood spent trying to stay steady in a world where they were the only stabilizing force. Love is never simple for an only child. Not because they don't want it, but because the blueprint they grew up with makes intimacy feel both deeply comforting and quietly dangerous. When you grow up without siblings, your first experiences of emotional closeness are vertical, not horizontal. Parents and adults are your primary attachment figures. So you learn early to adapt, to behave, to meet expectations. Love becomes something you earn, not something that simply exists. That childhood conditioning ripples into adulthood in 3 common ways. 1. The anxious giver. They fear being too much. They over-function in relationships, anticipating needs, softening conflicts, apologizing first even when they're hurt. Underneath is the old belief: if I don't perform perfectly, love might disappear. 2. The avoidant lone wolf. They're deeply self-reliant, comfortable in solitude, and slow to let anyone close. Partnership feels vulnerable, even intrusive. Because needing someone feels foreign, almost unsafe. They've survived everything alone. Depending on a partner feels like losing control. 3. The push and pull heart. A mix of both, craving closeness, but fearing the weight of expectations. Wanting connection yet panicking when someone gets too close. This ambivalence is often rooted in being the sole emotional anchor for their parents. In love, only children often carry a quiet fear. What if I disappoint them the way I once feared disappointing my parents? What if I'm not enough? Or worse, what if I'm too much? But beneath all those patterns is a truth rarely acknowledged. Only children love with an intensity shaped by years of longing for a peer, a partner, a witness. When they finally let you in, they don't just give affection, they give a lifetime of stored up tenderness, loyalty, and depth. Loving an only child means being invited into a world they've built alone and trusted to finally share. There is a moment in every only child's adulthood when the abstract suddenly becomes real. A parent gets sick. A doctor calls. A decision has to be made. And in that moment, the truth hits with a force nothing prepares you for. There is no we. There is only I. For people with siblings, these moments are shared. Someone divides the paperwork. Someone covers the hospital shift. Someone else takes the financial lead. The emotional weight gets distributed, even if unevenly. But for an only child, every role becomes theirs: the advocate, the caretaker, the decision maker, the financial planner, the emotional anchor, all at once. It's a kind of pressure few people talk about because it's so deeply personal, so quietly overwhelming. You're not just managing logistics. You're holding the 2 people who once held you. You're navigating the decline of the very figures who defined your world. The decisions feel impossibly heavy. Should I approve this surgery? Can they stay at home? Is it time for hospice? Every choice feels like both love and betrayal. Every outcome feels like your responsibility alone. And the financial burden in countries like the US only amplifies this weight. Nursing homes, medical bills, long-term care. There is no sibling to split the cost, the errands, the grief. Then comes the emotional aftermath. When a parent dies in a family with siblings, memories are shared, stories are retold, grief is held in community. But for an only child, the silence after loss is profound. There's no one left who remembers the same dinners, the same vacations, the same versions of your parents. You become the sole archivist of your entire family history, and when you go, it all goes with you. This is the burden no one sees, the future weight that shapes an only child long before it arrives. The story of an only child has never been about deficiency. It has always been about adaptation, quiet, intelligent, resilient adaptation. And when you strip away the stereotypes, a different picture emerges. Only children aren't selfish. They're hyper-responsible, shaped by carrying roles meant for many. They aren't spoiled. They're self-reliant because they learned early that their first safety net was themselves. They aren't antisocial. They're selective and loyal, choosing depth over noise. And they aren't maladjusted. They're resilient, sculpted by solitude and sharpened by expectation. But strength alone isn't the destination. Healing is. Healing begins when an only child learns they don't have to earn love through perfection. That asking for help isn't weakness. That sharing their inner world won't collapse it. That the people who care about them want to be part of their life, not just impressed by it. And healing grows when they build chosen family, create shared memories, and let someone else become a witness to their story. Because even a life built alone is not meant to be lived alone. If this video helped you feel understood, or if it reminded you of someone you love, I'd love to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. And if you want more deep, cinematic psychology videos like this, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. We explore the quiet parts of the human heart here.